started in hard times to bring us all in, into the laughter through thick and through thin, for public power enthusiasts without.
I'm Paul Dockery, a Senior Manager of Energy Resource Strategy and Planning for Seattle City Light and an energy industry practitioner.
I'm Dr. Ahlmahz Negash, a Principal Resource Planning Analyst for Tacoma Power and an energy systems researcher and energy justice enthusiast.
I'm Conleigh Byers, an environmental fellow at Harvard Kennedy School of Government, researching grid decarbonization and electricity market design.
And I'm Farhad Billimoria, a director in the Power and Renewables Group of S&P Global and a visiting research fellow at the Institute for Energy Studies at the University of Oxford.
Special thanks to the presenting sponsor of today's episode, the Energy Authority, for making this episode possible. Learn more about the Energy Authority at teainc.org. On Public Power Underground, we talk about the energy enthusiasm trifecta of electrification, markets, and people. On today's episode, we're discussing the energy transition's impact on distribution engineering. Now, Farhad and Conleigh, last episode, I think just by happenstance, we got into the thick textbooks around transmission. And so I came up with a game this week to start it out. I'm calling it 30-second theory. And I thought I would give each of you 30 seconds to discuss how textbooks think about distribution systems. Do you like this idea? Does this fill you with hope and inspire, or does it fill you with dread and fear?
I think an equal dose of both, actually.
Which is healthy. I think that's good. How about you, Conleigh?
Well, I don't know that the textbooks cover this in a lot of depth, right? This is kind of a newer area, thinking about pricing at the distribution level, but we can definitely tie it back to the theory at the bulk transmission level.
Okay.
So, yeah, I think you can still bring in a textbook.
You're hopeful. Okay. So I have a timer somewhere, and we're going to pretend that there is a timer going. I'm going to start with you, Farhad. Give me your 30-second theory about distribution systems.
So no big textbooks today. The key point that I'd like to make from a theoretical perspective is one of scale. There you go. And actually nothing, that one doesn't really cover. It's a great textbook, but it doesn't cover. So it's really this new area. But one of scale, really, and the operational research problem goes from, today we can clear thousands of nodes in a large-scale wholesale market, maybe tens of thousands, and a lot of transmission components and generators and resources, usually in if it's a well-designed program, really in a matter of seconds. Now we've got to scale that up to potentially millions and millions and millions of nodes. To a system that involves much more complicated components, as well as now the complexities of distribution networks, which again is an order of magnitude higher than transmission. And so the problem just starts to scale up and up and up, and we sometimes lose some of those really nice properties that we're able to do in transmission land that make such great outcomes and such great physics and engineering and economics too.
So you took your 30 seconds of theory to go into like the software engineering and the modeling complexity. That's where we're going, right?
Yeah, the operations research problem is one that really scales up, and that was sort of a bit of a bad explosion, but it sort of explodes the problem, I guess. That's sort of a little putt-putt noise. I don't know.
I like it. Okay, 30 seconds of theory, Conleigh. What do you got for us?
So the reason we're talking about the distribution system now is because of the emergence of price-responsive demand and distributed resources. So the distribution system isn't just passive anymore, sending things in and taking things out. It could actually respond. And two, because we want to electrify transportation and heating, so meaning that the total electric load is probably going to be higher. From the academic theory perspective, Schweppe's spot pricing of electricity and theory of locational marginal pricing, that can be extended to the distribution system, but big issues with implementation arise. So we can talk about that in a bit more depth later. But yeah, the computation ability part of it is a big aspect. The second thing I want to bring up about the distribution system is that we aren't locked into our current car-dependent transportation systems when we're thinking about building out the when we're thinking about building out the distribution system to accommodate a shift from personal ICEs, internal combustion engines, to the same number of personal EVs. This isn't actually a requirement, and it's not inevitable. We could shift that to more rapid transit, walkable, bikeable communities, and doing so would give us more bang for our buck from the grid. Or at least that's my contention.
I like the contention. Ahlmahz, did you want to get in on 30 seconds of theory?
Oh,
You did
no,
your dissertation on demand response, pricing mechanisms for demand response?
valuing distributed energy resources, and part of that was looking at how to compensate demand response, and to do so in a way that's fair. And then, like, after having graduated, that definition of fairness is starting to evolve. And when I heard you, Conleigh, talking about price, because prices to devices, that was all the rage when I was doing my PhD. But there's a layer of like looking out for our vulnerable customers that just gets lost in that whole discussion about bringing prices all the way down to the distribution system. And when you said like a lot of difficulty implementing, that was the first thing that went to my head, is how do you do that in a way that's fair, and fair doesn't necessarily mean economically efficient. Yeah, that's my 30 seconds right there.
Yes, the distinction between fairness and economic efficiency. I don't know. That's pretty good take. I thought of so I'm glad you brought up spot pricing of electricity, because I think of that as like the seminal text when it comes to distribution systems, because it was an attempt to transactive energy at devices. I think of that book as the first attempt to kind of bridge that theoretic space.
Yeah. Well, actually, one of Schweppe's earlier articles, which was called Back to the Future, in 1979, talked about hierarchical control and prices to the consumer. So if that's not, I mean, that was just, you know, at the time may have really sounded quite crazy, but that foresight is just amazing. Today, we're actually trying to put that vision into implementation, and we're still a little bit of ways, but to me, it just, I mean, the foresight of that whole piece of work, and it was, I listened to a lecture by Paul Dockery recently where he was really talking about Schweppe's in his seminal work. They kind of made some really strong assumptions around, well, they didn't really touch upon retail as much. Whereas Schweppe's work was really about trying to get these the response to the consumer, which was incredibly visionary.
Yeah, I want to give, for those in the Northwest that listen to this podcast, Eric Hyacin, who was my manager when I first joined the region in, I won't give a year. Eric Hyacin is referenced and acknowledged in this book that got published in the 80s, because he part of his master's thesis contributed. And I guess I talked to Eric about it, and he said Fred was an incredibly gracious person and incredible to work with. And I want to give a shout out to Eric Hyacin, friend of the underground, who may be listening. Okay, that's enough for the 30 seconds. Go ahead, Ahlmahz, sorry.
Oh no, I just said, how about that? Interesting tidbit.
Yes, absolutely. So next up is our TLDR segment on topical news stories we call Short to Ground. Are you ready, Ahlmahz?
I'm ready.
This is Short to Ground, a segment where we blow a fuse covering the news. I'm Paul Dockery.
I'm Ahlmahz. And we're
shorting the ground.
The National Renewable Energy Laboratory released a part of its electrification future studies on the major drivers of long-term distribution transformer demand on March 4th. The report includes estimates that distribution transformer manufacturing capacity may need to increase 160% to 260% by 2050, compared to 2021 levels in order to meet residential, commercial, industrial, and transportation energy demands. The first phase of the study quantified the number, capacity, age, and use of the nation's current transformer stock. And this is something that has never been done before. Find a link in the show notes.
Never been done before. That was good work. I'm glad they finally did it. The National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners, NARUC, and the U.S. Department of Energy recently published cybersecurity baselines for both electric distribution systems and distributed energy resources connected to them. The joint guidance focused on state public utility commissions, utilities, and DER operators and aggregators, and was meant to be coupled with upcoming implementation guidance. The baselines define the minimum set of cybersecurity controls that should be considered. Information in the links in the show notes.
Okay, moving on. Portland-based GridStore announced its acquisition of a planned 450 megawatt, 900 megawatt hour lithium-ion battery storage installation developed by Balanced Rock Power in Galveston County, Texas, on Thursday, March 7th. According to the company's press release, the project is connecting to an existing substation near the congested load center of Houston, and the project will increase the resilience of the Texas electric grid by helping ensure reliable power supply during disturbances and peak hours through participation in the electricity market managed by ERCOT.
The National Renewable Energy Lab recently released a report studying the economics of building long-distance, high-voltage transmission lines that are anchored to interregional renewable energy zones, or IREZs, or areas with very high concentrations of the lowest cost, dependable renewable energy potential. The envisioned transmission lines would cross hundreds of miles and link the nation's best renewable energy resources to the biggest load centers. According to the analysis, the IRES approach could save money overall, help keep the lights on, and prudently speed up the pace of decarbonizing the nation's electric grid.
In an ideal world. Moving on. Inter-regional renewable energy zones, or IREZs.
It's the same. This is continuing the same thing.
Are an actionable piece of a larger national picture that NREL and PNNL have been studying for more than 2 years. The National Transmission Planning Study, conducted by NREL and PNNL and funded by the Department of Energy's Grid Deployment Office, aims to identify transmission options that will provide broad-scale benefits to electric customers, inform regional and interregional transmission planning processes, and identify interregional and national strategies to accelerate decarbonization while maintaining system reliability. That's a tall order. You can find more information in the show notes.
Moving on to spot market power. Spot market power in the Northwest for delivery Thursday, March 14th with $37 per megawatt hour, with natural gas at $1.45 per MMBTU, translating to a spark spread of $27.54 and a heat rate of 25,500. Spot power in the Southwest was at $8.50. Southern California at $5. Northern California at $26.91. New England at $20.85, and the Mid-Atlantic at $18.74. The Midwest coming in at $21.39.
Wholesale spot prices for NEM, the National Electricity Market for some of Australia, on March 14th averaged $73.91 in New South Wales, $87.96 for Queensland, $57.03 for South Australia, and $55.45 for Victoria. Tasmania settled at 77.71. And of course, all units are in Australian dollars per megawatt hour.
Back to the North American energy market, Henry Hub spot price fell 42 cents from $1.66 per MMBTU last Wednesday, March 6th, to $1.24 per MMBTU on March 13th, the lowest price in inflation-adjusted terms since at least 1997. The price of the 12-month strip averaging April 2024 through March 2025 futures contract declined 14.2 cents to $2.68.
Okay. Working natural gas storage totaled 2,325 billion cubic feet, which is about 629 BCF, or 37% more than the 5-year average, and 336 BCF, or 17% more than last year at the same time. Dry natural gas production decreased by 0.2% to 101.6 BCF per day, about 4 BCF per day lower than the record high set in December of 2023.
That's it for our TLDR segment. Thanks to Public Power Underground's production partners at News Data for letting us use their leads. If you want to know more, you can find the complete stories in California energy markets and clearing up. Let's close it out, Ahlmahz. That's
short
to ground. Who wants to start? Any takeaways from the news stories, Farhad?
So I think this idea of regional energy zones is really interesting. This is not the first time that these types of concepts have been talked about, and indeed, ERCOT was one of the earliest adopters and implementers of these competitive renewable energy zones. A few years later, Australia has now gone down that path. And what was interesting when these original studies were done as sort of really technical and engineering studies, they then sort of were the implementation, the planning and implementation worked into this sort of almost like a facilitated access to these types of zones. And now in today's national electricity rules, these are now specific and defined terms, and there are a range of regulatory measures that now apply specifically to these areas and these zones that distinguish them from other zones. So it sort of led to this now sort of almost like, you know, separation of the transmission grid into these sort of preferred areas and non-preferred areas. And it would be interesting to see if we go down the same path in the US. But yeah, it really has shifted that dialogue into more of a facilitated access, facilitated hedging of investment in those areas. And there seems to be more of a preference from the central agencies to kind of push the renewables into those areas, or, you know, have certain benefits associated with those areas.
I think we talked about that a little last time, didn't we? The idea that you can connect faster if you use these approaches, and maybe there's lower hurdles for connection. Is that part of what the benefit is to those renewable energy zones in Australia?
Yeah, that's a key issue, and that's a key element of the advantage access rights. And I think one of the interesting aspects of these is that typically when you do interconnection and access, it's been sort of a resource by resource approach, where each resource comes online, does a study. You know, there may be 2 other resources want to apply in the meantime, so you have to redo the studies, and this sort of iterative, you know, path to nowhere sometimes that happens. One of the benefits of looking at it as an area, as a zone, is that ability for again, potentially like a common pool planning or a common approach to interconnection, and that's one area which could facilitate more connection and more efficient connection, rather than this sort of iterative approach, which really was catered to this idea where you had these, you know, traditionally big generators that would connect in an area, and they would be the generator in that area, rather than having many different resources connecting.
Well, any other stories to touch on, or any thoughts, Conleigh, on IRESs?
Not too much more. I mean, I agree with the conversation that's been had so far. You know, the more you can shift to centralized, forward-looking transmission planning with interregional coordination, the better, as opposed to the very myopic, let's do an upgrade every time somebody wants to connect. I think you're much better off with the former if you can get it.
I mean, transformers. I feel like we need to just like take a moment and realize transformer manufacturing is currently constrained under just our current ability to connect and manage our existing grid. And DOE study identifying 160% to 260% more manufacturing capability needed by 2050. There's a big lift, high capital intensive industry. And I didn't include one of the stories about DOE increasing the efficiency standards for transformers, which would require a whole new manufacturing base for transformers in the future, which efficiency on every transformer is a huge energy savings, but it does require a huge investment in manufacturing capability to get us to the new efficiency standards. Transformers, anybody else just wake up at night in cold sweats thinking about transformers? It's just me.
No, but when I saw this story, something that puzzles me is whenever, like, I know about the reality of the transformer shortages and the long times they're taking, and my God, the costs are going up. I don't know why this hasn't encouraged more manufacturers, I guess, to enter the market. Like, this is flying in the face of market fundamentals. Like, isn't this supposed to attract people into this area? I don't understand why it looks like this problem is only going to get worse, when it should be, like, we should be seeing, and maybe it's happening and it just takes a long time for this manufacturing process to get set up. But it puzzles me. It puzzles me that to be honest, makes me wonder, why don't I have a transformer manufacturing company? Maybe I'm in the wrong business here.
You know what business I want to get into is the transformer what's the right word for it? Refurbishment. There's the word. Transformer refurbishment business, because I do think it used to be, oh, I'll just buy a new one. It's cheap. It'll be easy. Now you're getting into like, oh,
Yep.
send that one that blew up. I bet somebody could grab some parts from it, or at least some raw materials, and help make one.
We need to have like a local transformer fix-it shop or something.
Yes, that's exactly what I think would be
Don't
great.
give me any ideas, Farhad.
Okay, I also, just to the cybersecurity, to preview and foreshadow the conversation coming up with Francis Sammy, I think the cybersecurity aspects of having a lot more microprocessors on the grid in order to help enable price responsive demand is glad they're working on it, because for me that's a huge area of interest and importance. Okay. We're taking a quick break for a word from our sponsor, and then you'll hear my interview with Francis Sammy. Public Power Underground is sponsored by the Energy Authority. The energy transition is upon us, and if there's one company who has public power's back, it's the Energy Authority. TEA isn't just any sponsor of the show, they're the backbone of what we stand for, keeping the power in the hands of the people. With offices in Bellevue, Washington, and Jacksonville, Florida, TEA has coast-to-coast expertise in energy trading, RTO management, portfolio management, advanced analytics, renewable energy, and much more. As the energy industry evolves, so does TEA, staying on the cutting edge of technology to help their 75-plus public power clients maximize the value of their assets. When you partner with TEA, you're not just keeping up, you're leading the charge. Learn more at teainc.org. That's teainc.org for more. This week, I interviewed Francis Sammy. Francis is a licensed professional engineer that works as the supervisor of the Systems Distribution Engineering Work Group for Seattle City Light. He was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York, studied electrical engineering at Howard University, and works on distribution systems for Seattle. Francis lives in Bacon Hill with his family of 3 and says you can find him riding around town on his bike, vibing out at a concert, laboring up the basketball court, or sliding down a mountain face first. He's an enthusiast like us, which is why I invited him on to talk about distribution engineering from a practitioner's perspective.
Did I hear you say Bacon Hill?
He did.
Did I say Bacon Hill? I meant Beacon
I
Hill.
was gonna let that fly.
Oh, yeah, we're going to leave this in. Maybe you can cut out that brief pause, Sarah, but we're going to leave this in. Okay. Hi, Francis. Welcome to Public Power Underground.
I love your enthusiasm. Glad to have you. Good morning.
Good morning. I also I've appreciated your enthusiasm in meetings I have been in with you, which is why I wanted to invite you to come talk about things we are enthusiastic about.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I've been doing power my entire adult and pre-adult life, and it's what I know. And yeah, I like it. It's getting fun. It's getting funner the more I learn and the higher I go. It's nice.
That is nice. That's a great feature of a job, actually, in a career.
It's
Um,
helpful with life.
yes, it is. Yes, it is helpful with life. Do you know what you're getting into?
Kind of. I watched like a half a podcast with one before. There was
That's
some
perfect.
pretty big brains on there, and my brain is not so big. So big
You're
intimidated.
you're right in you're exactly the
wedge.
right person that we want to interview. So this season on Plug Power Underground, we're asking practitioners like you in the energy industry to provide insights into their areas of enthusiasm that may get lost. So we do talk to researchers and policymakers, and sometimes the practice of energy delivery gets lost in abstraction. And what we're trying to do is kind of bridge the gap, make sure we have real on the ground perspectives as part of the insights provided to policymakers and researchers. So Francis, what is your area of enthusiasm?
Great question. I am a distribution engineer for Seattle City Light. My role is as distribution engineering. I'm the systems. There's two parts. There's systems and services. System is responsible for the backbone, pretty much the high gauge, medium voltage. We operate 26.4 kV in Seattle. Most utilities, I think, are 15. But the medium voltage, anything that touches the transformer, anything you see out in the street, any of the big wires, that's our group's responsibility to maintain, decide where it goes, how big it needs to be, and ensures it stays up for 50 plus years. I've seen some polls.
50 plus.
50 plus, that is great engineering. If there's stuff that's past my lifetime, I will be proud. I will be smiling in my grave. We subjugate to the problems. People only care about power when it's off. So, and a great professor of mine in school said, 2 rules: if it ain't broke, don't fix it, and don't reinvent the wheel. So, if it's up for 100 years, it's fine. It's stable. It should be replaced. It could be replaced, but that's great engineering to have it be freestanding and unabridged and not fall down, not leaning, just kind of stable.
Yep, great. Well, that's a great segue because what the 2 rules were: 1, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And what was the second one again? Sorry.
Don't reinvent the wheel.
Don't reinvent the wheel. Great segue. Great segue to what we're going to talk about today. There are 2 areas where maybe it is broken, we need to fix it, and maybe we are reinventing the wheel. And what does that mean for you as a distribution engineer? So 2 things I really want to focus on with your practitioner perspective is, first, we use these heuristics, these rules of thumb, my understanding in distribution engineering, like establish what we need to put into a system. So we don't have to go back to first principles every time we're engineering or every time we're doing something, changing our distribution system. And part of my perspective on the energy transition is some of those heuristics may not apply in a system in the future as they have in the past. I want to talk about your perspective on that, if that's real and right in your experience, or if you have any other takes on that. The second thing is, I'm our resource planning and analysis team, which does long-term resource planning. And one of the things we see in our resource plans is transmission constraints getting to our system. And one of the solutions for that is we rely on resources in our system and deploying more behind the meter resources and distributed energy resources. And I want to talk about what that feels like for you as you're engineering our distribution system. So those 2 things I want to talk about. Are you ready for the first one?
Okay. Yes, sure. Go ahead.
Okay. So heuristics of the energy system are changing. You use rule of thumbs for engineering. How is it impacting your work? Do you see that as a real thing that's impacting the way you engineer distribution system?
I have a threefold answer to that question. 1 is about the nature of the load itself. 2 is about permitting and the process behind getting things done. And 3 is about customer interactions and the time it takes to get stuff done. Time.
Okay.
So one, the energy system, the load itself, changing characteristics. You know, forever, our biggest draw is heat, especially up in the Northwest. You know, down south, probably air conditioning or whatever, but it's the HVAC heating cooling system. And that's changing slowly / rapidly for us in the power utility world, because everything is super slow. But in the private sector or whatever, things are getting more electrified. I've got electric bus projects. King County, the 8th largest bus system in the US, is hoping to be the first all-electric bus fleet. I think 2026 is the first rollout. 2030 is the final rollout.
Okay.
Fairly aggressive timetable on our for us. But the load with these chargers for mobility, car chargers, they're not like heat, where my heater just turned on, if you heard it. You know, when your heater turns on, it'll hit to a certain temperature, then taper off. And, you know, inrush current will come in. Inrush is an engineering term. When something starts up, a motor starts up, the most amount of current is at the start, and then it kind of levels off, and then it hits what it needs to do, and then it shuts off. With this electric charging, it's pretty much ramp up and then stay that way for 8 to 10 hours. And that's not typically what we have been designing under for 150 years. It's usually like ramp up, hang out, roll down. And we can take those, you know, all these loads and all these graphs and kind of derate and have a best fit line. Diversity is what it's called, based on the number of homes and you know, the things in the area. But like I said, if everybody has electric cars, everybody has electric car chargers, which, you know, I'm a proponent of green, clean, renewable energies. I love living in the Northwest. I love all the free water and power that we have. We have a distinct advantage for cheap, reliable electricity. And I want to see electric cars everywhere. I want to see an electric city. Are dependent on gas and fossil fuels are not great, in my opinion. And I just love electric. I love all things electric. I'm an electrical engineer. It's my gag. It's
great business, right? It's great business.
It's good business. It's clean.
That's
it's
right.
happy.
Can I ask about like the load, the way these are changing? And you talk about how it's a higher load factor now. You're going used to design for inrush but lower load factor. Now you have to think about your load factor is probably near the inrush current. And it probably is also the case for some of our new heating load as well. And I'm actually curious about, so the city of Seattle has a lot of natural gas heating for homes. And when you talk about the diversity of residential loads, do you have to rethink that diversity benefit in a future where you expect most home heating to be electric and not natural gas? Is that rule of thumb changing?
Good engineer does. The city of Seattle has
You're a good engineer, so then yes.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's high praise. The city of Seattle has already said no gas. All buildings must be electric, or anyway.
Right.
I think of a certain size, of a certain class. So, you know, they've come to us and told us this is coming already. So it's already changing how we, you know, value and what we need to look for. Also, the electric cars, there must be a minimum number of spots or spots ready. That is also changing how we derate that, how we see and how we derate our transformers and what we expect out of them, what we expect to push out. Because the NEC versus our rules versus the NEC, the National Electric Code. Our National Electric Code is very stringent, fairly conservative, and is great for not burning down your house and making sure that every home is good for anything electric wise. We don't have to operate that way. We want to thread the needle a little more, but no, that stuff's changing now, and we're seeing it on a local level, like the
Yeah.
big buildings, but future, we're going to see it more and more and more, and on the system level, it will show itself, it'll rear its head. So
So
go ahead.
I mean, you talked about what we're already doing for Seattle, and maybe it's helpful to listeners that aren't in the same sort of environment as us, where we have the policies already and we've already kind of started thinking about it.
Yeah.
So when you went from the rules of thumb on where you were expecting a proportion of most heating to come from natural gas to now where you're thinking about most heating coming from electric, what were the system components that actually had that changed the most? Was it a transformer where you had to think about bigger transformers for a community? Was it the line? Do you start scoping like higher gauge wires? The words like
No, those are 100% the words. You nailed it.
Yes, nailed it. So can you talk about those, like what the step change was?
So we work. I mean, my brain works best backwards. You start with what you need, and then you work backwards from there. And what I would say is, I like to say we stand on the backs of giants. Just like that 100-year-old pole, we've got those things baked into our system already. So for the first wave, is what I will call it, I think we're pretty good. It's that second and that third wave where we need to, the stuff that's aging out now, that's getting old, 50, 60, 40 years, depending on the condition, the soil, where it is, what it's being used. That's the stuff that we need to plan for the future, to bake in a little more contingency and reserve. So when that next step, because like you said, the old heuristics are getting thrown out the window. So I think we're good for the next 5 to 10 years as this stuff slowly rolls out. But it's, like I said, a good engineer designs for 30 to 50 years from now. And
that's right.
What that's going to look like is scary and unknown, but it's my job, it's our job to take a guess and look at the data, look at the numbers, look at what's written out there, and kind of come up, figure it out, take a guess, and the people after us will figure it out if we mess up, but we're doing the best we can.
Yeah, we have to train the people coming after us to think well of us and to understand our intent. We intend to do well, but you are going to have to probably come up and clean some stuff up. So you had 3 things on your list. We spent a lot of time talking about the first one. What were second and third?
Just permitting.
Yes.
City is smarter. The city is getting, I don't know if they're bigger or they care a little bit more about the things that we're doing. So permitting takes longer. We have to get more authorization. The city is getting more construction. So developers, and that's have significant right-of-way impacts. So like the city wants to make sure that there's walkable roads and there's traffic impacts and making sure everybody's doing the right thing. And with that, the permitting process is slowing down. It's getting legwork and it's taking more time. Same thing. It's the same component kind of with our customers as well. They're getting smarter. They know about a lot of the heuristics that we operate on, and they want to save every dollar they can. So they try and thread the needle. They change when they can. They switch things up. We want to be more customer facing. We want to be more customer service, and that means hand-holding, and that means less time to crank out engineering if we're, talking to a customer about options and that kind of stuff. So time. It used to be, get us all the information, put it down on paper. We'll go hide in a room for 2 weeks. We'll crank back out your drawing, and then you're gone. We're on to the next one. It's not so much anymore. Now it's like, they'll have a best guess of what they want to do. We'll say, we'll come back, we'll take a look at it and say, do you really want to do this? Do you want to do this? How about this? And it goes back and forth, and then we'll go back, and then we'll finish, and then we'll say, oh, we found something else. We changed our mind. Can you go back and change it again? So it's the whole customer service thing. Our customers are smarter. They know what they want. They're trying to thread the needle. They're trying to save every dollar, which is fine, but it takes more time is just the big issue.
Yeah. So the way I interpret what you're saying is like this agile engineering approach where you're trying to interface with the customer and hear them and not just do like from soup to grave kind of. I mixed analogies there, but do more, less of the down waterfall project management, more agile project management. But what that takes is actually a lot more reliance on your rules of thumb and your heuristics, because it does rely on you being able to fairly quickly tell them what the impact of a choice will be without going and like rerunning a model. So it is a little bit of a conundrum. Are there any techniques or insights for researchers and policymakers to think about? If actually, we'll get to that question last. We'll save that one. But I actually think the permitting and the customer are like really important dynamics that require some research can help inform, especially on the permitting side.
You know, we live in a world, social media and visibility and Twitter and connectivity, emails, PR, everybody's connected. Every problem can be amplified at a moment's notice. And which means you have to be quick to respond to things as they come up, because you never know when it blows up. It's not like you can't just leave a problem and go away, because in the old days, you know, it depends. It needed a voice to amplify it. Now everybody has a voice, and things need to get fixed, and there's tons of things to fix, I guess.
Let's pivot to the second topic. We talked a lot about the heuristics of the grid and how they're changing. And I want to talk a little bit more about how I interface with you, which is around me as a resource planner saying, actually, Francis needs to do more work because I need to rely on him to deliver power locally because I can't get it from the bulk system to Seattle, or at least in some scenarios, that is a constraint that I'm trying to manage around. And it may be better actually to do it locally, and there may be values to doing some resource development locally. Does that cause you dread or hope or optimism?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm a natural pessimist at heart, and
you're an engineer, right?
Yeah, exactly. So the first thing is I wouldn't say dread is not the word. Scared is the word.
Okay.
I don't know, and I don't want to screw up. And I feel like there is a little bit of responsibility, and there's still not a lot written down, and well, there may be, but it's really hard to find on the nature of what we're expected to see, how things are expected to grow at what rate, and how it's going to affect us and the way our crews operate and work. I want to see it. I love it. Like I said, I love our green future. I love the more energy we generate, the less we need to use from the dams, which means the more stuff. I have visions of, you know, wheeling electricity nationally. We are lucky in the.
You have visions of a macro electric grid. That's your dream.
I wouldn't say it's a dream. It's kind of a nightmare. We got piggyback deals right now, but I do think it's going to happen. There are states down south. There are places that aren't as lucky as us as far as natural, automatically generating resources. I love electricity. I love power. I think my dream city has solar panels on half the roofs and pole-mounted car chargers, 2 to 3 on every block. Yeah.
I love pole-mounted car chargers. I actually love 120-volt car charging. I think that is great high load factor use of our electric system, which is awesome. Big fan of it. When you think about the type of engineering challenges of more distributed energy resources, what are the areas that cause you the fear from like the engineering side of it?
Number one is backflow. There's this thing where it's UL 1350. I don't remember. It doesn't matter. There's a number. If the meter or the inverter doesn't see load from the utility, then it won't kick load back. It means if we shut the power off at the street, then the home should recognize that and not be able to push things back out onto the street. That's great. That's good. I think it works for now, but I think as time goes along, things get cheaper, people cut corners. I worry about not the 80% of homes. I worry about the 2% of people who get the cheap stuff or hotwire something or use something that's broken, where somebody thinks something's dead, and then when I say dead, not energized, and they get zapped, and we have a problem, or they get shocked and they fall out of the bucket or something like that. I just worry about what happens in the future with because we know things get I guess they get smarter and dumber and cheaper at the same time always, and I worry about things breaking and what that looks like. But things are moving slow enough to where we're able to, I guess, capture some of that, and we get to modify some of our practices and processes to mitigate and to anticipate anything like that.
Yeah. One of the promises of the energy future, I think I hear people talk about, is that if you have more behind the meter resources or distributed energy resources, it can reduce investment in some of the distribution network. Like you can reduce, you mentioned the diversity benefits in a region. What's your take on that dream of it's smart enough we can put in a smaller transformer because there's solar back here? What's your take on that?
So the transformer, we can put in a smaller transformer, but what I would say is we're using, what we want to do is we're moving to a more software, smarter based system. And I think like I said, don't reinvent the wheel. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. We are a hardware business. We physically channel the electrons from the dam to your home, with hardware. And now we're talking about massaging it and software and moving things around with coding. And we are not coders. We are hardware people. And to a hardware person, if you need more energy, just make the wires bigger. Make them stronger, make them taller. Don't make them smarter. Why? I mean, you make them smarter, it creates its own problems of talking to each other and mistakes and software. Just make them bigger. It's not that complicated. With homes, I do think it's great that solar is here, and people can, when there is an outage or something like that, they can island in the perfect situation. When I say island, they can shut themselves off in the grid and maintain power to their home for 4 to 6 to 8 hours, depending on the level of battery they have, storage they have. Maybe a backup battery in your home and battery in your car that you can pull back to use to power your home. So I do think it's great, but how that affects us, we're so dumb as far as the tools we have. People are still amazed to this day that when their power shuts off, the utility doesn't know. We don't know until you call us. And when you call us, then we can kind of piece it together, depending on how many people call us. And then we find out where the problem is. So, yeah.
I love your perspective on this. Like, we're a hardware business. If it's a constraint, just make it bigger. It almost it seems so intuitive maybe, but there you see the other side of it, right, where there's a bunch of investment you would have to make, and maybe there's a more efficient. Is your take largely that we're overthinking this? We're overthinking in an attempt to. One of the things philosophically I struggle with is sometimes we overthink the optimal solution when the most actionable solution is really just the simple one, where your take.
We'll spend $300,000 on studies and over the course of 4 to 5 years on coding systems and hiring coding engineers, and $500,000 on new software people, when it would probably take $1 million to have somebody climb 50 poles and restring new wire. And then guess what? We're good for another 30 years. And we didn't have to worry about software issues. Does this software talk to this software? We have to worry about how often updates happen, security. What if somebody takes it over? How much do we have to pay for Verizon, for the cell phone bill, for the things to talk to her? It's coverage and remote ears. Just make the wires bigger. so people can get power when they need it, how they need it.
And it's an investment. And it's investment in the community. One of the things I love about public power, which is why I'm an advocate, right, is it's very focused on like the community. And I like if I'm literally investing infrastructure in the community that can enable additional electric service in the future and flexibility, it's actually investment in the people that are going to climb that pole and string that wire, and an investment in infrastructure, which is why like when you were sharing this, it resonated with me of like if it's the constraint, just relieve the constraint.
People tell me we don't have enough power, and as a distribution engineer, it's just like, okay, get more power. We have it. We have it. We can buy it. We can build it. We can harness it. We have the capabilities to generate what we need. But we want to get into this little itty bitty thread the needle software smart coding world, because that's what everything else is. But that's not where we are as power. We're pretty dumb, and that's fine. But we are 100%, 99.999% reliable. You know, your power turns on mostly every time you need it.
So I want to transition to the researchers that listen to this podcast and your advice for them, those in policymakers. When I think about the like need for new understanding of the way we're going to operate our systems, the permitting and the people, I think you mentioned that on the distribution side, us on the bulk electric side, not to make it a dichotomy, but we have the same problem. And a part of it is an acknowledgement of the timelines that people are installing loads today. We need to deliver it to them. And what are the solutions to bridge that gap that can be executed quickly, that we can do quickly? And for me, that research in that topic is really important. But I wanted to get your take on if you're talking to researchers and really smart people, policymakers that are earnestly trying to answer questions that can help people like you trying to solve the distribution challenges for large municipal utilities or large utilities. What's your advice to them?
That's a great question. The nature of loads is where I'd like to start, and I think batteries are good too. How much they degrade, what's the recycle, when do we run out, when do we need to replace, that kind of things as far as localized.
Let me tighten in a little bit. Like, what areas of research would help you as a distribution engineer? Like, what areas? Like we talked about. Go ahead.
Thermal loading. Right now, I think we use we have our software programs that kind of anticipate how much properties. Okay, perfect example. We have a substation. Substation distributes power, takes big power, turns it into medium power, and distributes power throughout an entire neighborhood, say Capitol Hill or downtown or whatever. How the cables run, how much heat they push out, how much heat, because heat is a limiting factor for us. How much energy should we be derating our cables? How can we dissipate heat faster to make our wires last longer and pump more electricity through using what we have? I don't mean smarter. I mean physical capabilities, thermal. What new products can we use? What software? What gels can we use to cool? What can we add to shapes is a good one. What can we add to our concrete barriers that lets heat pull out instead of trapping them in? Things like that.
This has been so much fun. I love you solve the physical, actually solve the physical thing, and I love that. That's fun. Instead of what's the software solution for this problem? It's like, what's the thing? What's the physical thing?
You get me a problem is what can I do to fix it? Not what I don't think if you have a physical problem, I don't think our answer is in computers. I think physical problems require physical solutions, and I think smarter is better. It can be, but that's only when you're up against the wall. And I don't think we're up against the wall yet. I think we are creating a wall where one doesn't exist.
Love this. This is great. Thank you for the conversation. I'm going to pivot out of my trying to get into your practitioner perspective, and I'm going to try to pull you out and talk more about analogies. So this season on Public Power Underground, the hosts are competing in a season-long energy system analogies World Cup, the ESSA World Cup. And we're going to cut the recording and talk about, you're going to rank the analogies that we've gotten so far. But you, as a participant and an expert that we're interviewing, get to submit an analogy into the field and compete as well for the ESSA World Cup. Do you have an analogy that you'd like to submit to the field?
My analogy would be the electrical power system, as I see it, is like an old, reliable car. For me, that's my 98 Toyota Corolla that turned on every time I hit it. I hit the ignition. For my wife, it's her 2003 GMC Envoy. When it has breaks down or has a little bit of issues, we can always take it in. The parts are readily available. They're pretty much off the shelf. They're in that era, GM kind of hot swapped everything. Most of the big trucks all had the same guts on the inside. So I want to say our electrical power system is, old, reliable. It works when you need it to. Outside influence is the only time it really breaks down. And we're trying to get smarter. We're putting in that Bluetooth tape deck into it now to kind of modernize our system. And we hope we don't break what's already there, I guess is just what I want to say. Our power system works. It does what we need it to do. Things are changing a little bit. It's not going to self-drive itself, but we know what to do, and it's going to get you to work it back every day.
I like it. Thank you so much for your time. And this has been a lot of fun for me. I hope it was fun for you. Do you feel seen, heard, valued, and appreciated?
I do every day, I think. And thank you for this opportunity. I hope I didn't ramble too much. I hope we were able to massage into your niche or whatever for your podcast listeners. But yeah, thanks for having me, and have a good day.
Yeah, thank you. Now back to Ahlmahz, Conleigh, Farhad, and for more energy enthusiasm. Welcome back. Now we get to debrief from the discussion and update our priors based on the practitioner's reflections. Anything from the interview with Francis that you wanted to reflect on? I'll start with you, Ahlmahz.
Well, I will say, when he said, just this little humorous thing on the side here, when he said Bluetooth tape deck, I kind of chuckled, but then when you chuckled, I kind of fell out laughing at that point. I never heard those two words together. But on a more serious note, two things that he mentioned, like nuggets of wisdom that we've heard a million times over and over again. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, and don't reinvent the wheel. And I appreciated the practitioner's perspective on that. Honestly, I wasn't surprised, but it made me think about that balance we have when we talk about if it ain't broke, don't fix it. How we're basically having to balance between innovation and doing things that are just the tried and true way. And I think there's a time and place for both of those, but it's knowing that balance, which is why I'm so glad that Francis was on and was able to provide that perspective, because we probably do a lot more discussion about innovation than we do about recognizing the things that we do that are actually well done. And then, of course, the don't reinvent the wheel made me think about how, because he kept saying, sometimes you just need to build the thing, just build the thing, right? And my whole entire PhD was on distributed energy resources and basically doing the thing to avoid building the next thing, right? Like those non-wires alternatives, distributed resources instead of the having to consistently invest in supply side resources. And I again was thinking about that balance, knowing the time and the place where it's appropriate to do those non-wires solutions, And when it's time to just say, you know, this requires a large scale investment. This is not an NWA situation. So I appreciate it. I really appreciated his thoughts and reflecting on that balance. I got from him balance.
Yeah, similarly, I think maybe it came through in the interview. I was a little bit like impressed and kind of reset my priors around optimal solutions for distribution system planning and like optimizing your loads to make sure you're reducing your investment in distribution. His point was just like, just build it. Just go put more stuff in. And he, like as people who deal with the like customer surpluses and social optimal solutions, Conleigh or Farhad, any perspective on the, sometimes it's, go build it and then we'll solve how to manage that at the end?
Yeah, I don't think that it's a bad sentiment to say perfect can be the enemy of the good, right? In a lot of cases, I think that's a fair enough point. What this does raise for me is this question, though, of aligning incentives. So if we think about, who might be responsible for deciding how much software, non-wires alternatives we have versus just build more. Well, the thing about a distribution utility, as Francis outlined, is that it's a hardware business, right? They're a wires business. They don't know this other stuff as well. They don't really want to use it. And the incentive for them, they have no incentive necessarily to do, these non-wires alternatives unless somebody tells them to, but there's not necessarily a financial incentive to do so. So it is important to think about, okay, who's, making this claim, and do we think it applies in, some other context? So for instance, with the bulk transmission system, we have an issue right now where I think there's a lot of places where we could be using software to do dynamic line rating, but we're not doing that right now. And that's, this issue of the incentives aren't necessarily aligned for it, but it doesn't mean that it wouldn't be a lot more economically efficient to do it.
Hot takes to your audience of electric utility enthusiasts. I like it.
That's a really good point. And there was actually a great article by Paul Dockery recently, a working paper that was talking about performance-based incentives and performance-based regulation more generally. And one of the conclusions of this, even though it was something that really has been identified 10, 15 years ago, implemented in places like the UK, what he found was it was kind of sporadic at the distribution level in terms of implementing forms of performance-based regulation, incentive regulation for utilities. Not necessarily a consistent approach really across the country, and in transmission land, incidentally, it was essentially non-existent, was one of his key points. So I think that's one avenue, as Conleigh's rightly talked about incentives. That's and one of the challenges with a utility or a monopoly utility where we've sort of taken that decision essentially from an economic perspective that we're okay with a monopoly because we don't want to redouble or build the same network again or have because historically it was a competitive space, but we've taken that decision. But the challenge now is, well, how do you get that monopoly to behave in a way that we would approximate a competitive agent to behave, and that's the core challenge of regulation. And one of the ways that I think has been identified is performance-based regulation, which I think is interesting and probably the right time for it too.
Yeah, I've loved to learn more about performance-based regulation. I want to make one distinction here around the publicly owned utilities like Seattle City Light and investor-owned utilities, because I do think for a publicly owned utilities, in a lot of ways, the incentive structures are aligned and have a faster feedback loop to the communities served because they are regulated by elected representatives from the community. And actually, one of the takeaways I had where I was aligned with Francis, I was aligned with Francis. He's awesome. He's great. He's very enthusiastic. Me and him, we vibed. But around the community investment of some of these resources. So in a lot of ways, like his perspective on, we stand on the back of giants because they invested in this distribution network. And in the energy transition, What we mostly need is just more bigger wires. We need more transfer capability in some of our distribution systems. And for a publicly owned utility like us, that investment is an investment in the community that we serve. And I do think there is right pushback around making sure it's the investment has the reward for the community, and there isn't a better solution that can do this faster or better. But also just the acknowledgement that if I am putting infrastructure in the community, that is a benefit to the community, and the community can figure out ways to advance and increase customer surplus given the access to that infrastructure. Is that distinction lost? Do you think I'm just out in La La Land, or does that resonate at all?
I don't think you're entirely off there, but I would say that kind of narrative is predicated on the idea that the consumers are knowledgeable about what's going on and would be able to respond and say, this was far too costly to do, and have some kind of pushback. And like the less that happens, the more you'd still would be concerned about how is this entity's incentives aligned with finding that most efficient solution.
Yes.
Well, what I do agree with the fact that the public utilities tend to have that incentive to be for the community benefit, or just embedded in their business model. So distinguishing between those the public utilities, yeah, that absolutely resonated with me, Paul.
I also think, we talked about it last week in the interview with John Hairston as well, but there is the social science skill set needed in this public space. Because Ahlmahz, you and I, we do integrated resource plans for a public utility. Tacoma, peers like me think they do a great job of community engagement. I think there's a lot to learn amongst other public utilities on how to do that actually well. And to your point, Conleigh, make sure you're informing the community about those choices and the trade-offs associated with resource investments like this, so that it can be responsive and incentives can be aligned. For me, that's an area of really important research that would be beneficial.
Yeah, how to do better community engagement, you're saying?
How to do better community engagement. How to rigorously translate qualitative analysis into quantitative models.
Let's talk later, Paul.
Yeah, I mean, I think you and I are aligned. That's why we do this podcast, because we both think that's a super cool thing that we should be better at. Any other topics on distribution engineering you wanted to get into, Farhad or Conleigh?
I think one of the really interesting questions from both an academic and a practical perspective is this concept of prices to devices, and I think this is again a really early concept, and we mentioned Fred Schweppe's early work, but the key challenge is how we do it, and I think the ability to translate what we've done in the wholesale space down to the retail level. Again, it's possible. There's some more, I guess, I think it's maybe a little bit more of a complex problem, as we were saying, from an operations research perspective. But one of the issues is how we do it, to how we extend this concept to the consumer, who has different degrees of perception of these risks, of different levels of risk aversion, and one big thing which I'm really focused on is hedging. Hedging is hard enough to retail and generator levels. How do we hedge to the consumer? We've seen the impact of something like the gritty model during really scarcity type events, and how challenging it is to actually implement that type of framework. So one of the potential avenues there is, well, we should provide some sort of hedge product. Well, how do we do that now to consumers in the distribution grid, which face not only the wholesale level constraints and challenges, but distribution level constraints and system security issues?
I totally agree with Farhad. The hedging question of how you would bring distribution level prices to consumers is unresolved. Along those lines, you also have issues like liquidity and market power that matter for transmission level locational marginal prices. And it's unclear how you would settle some of those issues on the distribution level. But also, it would probably be helpful to just give a couple more reasons why distribution locational marginal prices are different or would be more difficult. So one of them is that the distribution network is usually radial, meaning that often there's just one pathway from the transmission node to that particular consumer on the distribution network. So there's only one path that power can flow. And usually when we're talking about locational marginal pricing at the transmission level, what we're talking about are very mesh networks where there's a lot of loop flows. And so the path that electricity follows is governed by the laws of physics, not the economic or contract path. So it's unclear if you have a lot of radial networks, how much more information prices below that level would give you, and would it be worth it from a kind of cost benefit analysis perspective? And then the second is computational, right? As Farhad mentioned, you're talking about way more nodes potentially to deal with. So that just means that these problems balloon in size. And another issue is that the way that we solve the transmission level locational marginal prices is in most places with a linear approximation of power flow, and often either no losses or a very tertiary kind of treatment of losses. But on the distribution level, things like reactive power and voltage matter a lot more, and you can't make those same kind of simplifications. And real power losses as a percentage of the power you're transferring are also much higher. So you definitely have to account for them. So it's not really clear that on a distribution level, we could just say, hey, here's the real power prices and we're done. And, that maybe doesn't actually give us the information we were needing to make better decisions. And there's ways around that, right? There's, you could potentially calculate the distributional locational prices given some transmission level locational marginal price, but this is, an area of ongoing research. And I don't think anybody can say, okay, we've got exactly know how we would do this if we wanted to implement it yet.
But that is
absolutely.
a very, very good point, Conleigh. Is the juice worth the squeeze?
Can I push towards Farhad? The radial lines in the distribution network made me think of power system security, a topic you bring up a lot as it relates to, and I think you used this term last time of like the system strength in an area, like zonal system strength, and how that translates to like when we think about distribution and generation at the end of a line and how that helps or impairs system security. I think that's another fascinating topic here.
System security is a big one, particularly now because people are putting power plants on their houses, and are expected to put a lot of storage as well, storage banks on in their garages and around their houses and residences and businesses. And so now how those devices and those complicated control systems now interact with the grid is really important. One of the factors that can impact these types of devices and these types of this type of equipment is the conditions on the grid too. So if you have a fault, there was a really good study done in the Australian system a few years ago of a major event, a power system event, where they had lightning or they had some disturbances in the grid. And that affected the shutdown of distributed energy resources up to 50 kilometers away. So, for a system operator, that now increases the order of complexity. And there are a couple of ISO standards that have come out to try to better regulate the response of DER to these types of conditions. So one of the potential advantages for things like batteries in the future is maybe they can do things like add to reactive power compensation or provide different forms of service, voltage support, or in some cases, what they are doing now is frequency support to the grid. But the way in which then they interact in response to disturbances in the grid also needs to be accounted for. So if we talk about things like resilience and having supply to the home when the grid is interrupted, that's great, but the resource needs to be capable of doing that, needs to be capable of islanding, and forming its own little, mini or pico grid. So those are some really important questions when you get to that distribution level and consumer level and community-based resources too.
I want to turn this back to a conversation we had earlier, because I think one of the core functions of electric utilities is actually the pooling of those risks and those policies, the community's policy around what they want for their community as far as resilience and resource and interconnection and cost. For the community. And I think when we talk about the locational marginal pricing at the end user, that is one tool you can use to help resolve these changing system dynamics. There are probably other ways to address it. And from my perspective, it's one of the core functions of electric utilities is to understand the various options available to manage resources on your network, but then make sure the community's preferences and priorities are reflected in your pricing policies. Because I really think, and you heard probably in my interview with Francis, the need to get more customer solar. We need more of the batteries. We need more of the resources on the distribution network as we have transmission constraints to get the bulk electric systems to loads. And how you enable that can be either through showing prices to consumers. There may be other policy mechanisms to ultimately get there. But ultimately, we need to know what our choices are and then ask our community to inform our policies to enable it. And that takes social sciences. I'm just bringing it back.
Yes, I appreciate that. Whenever I'm not anti-markets, I love markets. I think there's value in markets. At the same time, I recognize that markets are, for the most part, about economic efficiency. And in a world that's rife with economic injustice, economic efficiency doesn't necessarily get a community where it needs to be. It can exacerbate economic injustices in our society. So, like when you say, yeah, I think about prices to devices, and in theory, it's so cool. I like it as an electrical engineer. But I think about it like at the end of the day, like a price to your hospital bed, or a price to your heater when you can barely afford your heat bill in a cold snap. Like those are things like the reality on the ground. I think as a society, we're going to have to come to, I think we're going to, our opinion about electricity being a right will need to evolve before we get to the point where, or the way I think about electricity, if it is critical to life as we know it. 100 years ago, we might not have had this conversation, but now, can we really, like, do prices to devices make sense in every case, or should we think of electricity in terms of rights and how to ensure everybody has what's due on what they should have? So that's something that, like, I feel this internal struggle between economic efficiency and just rights, the public good, what the community should have that's in their best interests, and they're not always aligned.
Good way to segue off to our next segment. So let's hit the typewriter and check in our ESSA World Cup standings from the qualifying round. Okay, with Francis's vote in, the grid is like the human body has taken the lead, with the electric sector is backcountry skiing in second. I think Farhad, you jumped way up the standing with some of your analogies. Wow. The electric sector is like water catchment and irrigation system is at 4. The grid is like air. Ahlmahz is like, it's got 2 in the top 4. The grid is like air is 3rd. The electric sector is like the Mumbai Double Tiffin service, comes in 5. John Hairston's The Electric Sector, or The Electric System is Like Golf, comes in at 6th. Crystal Ball's The Electric Sector is Evolving Like the Eras of Taylor Swift is tied at 7th with The Electric Utilities Are the PID Controllers of the Electric System. And then Conleigh, you and I are we're below the cutoff currently with The Electric Sector is Like a Game of Twister. Your analogy is at 9th, and nobody likes my ways of understanding the grid or like moral theories. But I think it was helpful context in the Grand Analogies opening to explain what the whole game's about. Anybody want to reflect on Francis's analogy that the electric sector is like an old reliable car, or update their analogies before we close it out?
Well, like I always say, doesn't make any sense to change a winning strategy. So I'm going to keep mine as they are. I'm a little surprised that Taylor Swift isn't a little higher up, though. I'll just say that.
It's only had one opportunity for voting so far.
Okay, all right.
For the listeners, this is a rigged system for
Yep.
those who entered later on. So golf and Taylor Swift are disadvantaged at the moment.
Currently, yeah, but they're already showing very strongly. Any updates to yours, Conleigh, or any additions? A new analogy you want to submit?
I think I'm far out of analogies.
Okay, Farhad, any updates or anything you want to change?
No, I'm going to stick with mine and just hope that they keep inching up the ladder.
Okay, well, I got into a Twitter argument about my electric utilities or the PID controllers of the electric system. If anybody wants to see my take, you can hop on Twitter and check it out. I think I'm very impressed by an old reliable car analogy, and we'll see where it goes from here.
Me too.
Maybe ran out of time, but yeah, because we have this new old car analogy, but I didn't get to go on an anti-EV rant in the main episode regarding distribution system upgrades.
So do you have an anti-EV rant that you need to include now?
Yeah.
Okay, do it. You're in Boston? You're in Cambridge?
I am in Cambridge. But so, Francis was mentioning that, electrifying everything, great idea. And, I think that's a great guiding principle for the most part, but I don't want to see electric vehicles everywhere, right? I think often when we talk in the United States or Canada specifically, where we're in these very car dependent transportation systems, we act as if this is inevitable and this is, the best thing we could do is electrify personal vehicles when, EVs don't solve a lot of the problems of automobility, right? When you have a lot of personal vehicles, they don't scale well. They cause lots of noise pollution, lots of local pollution. A lot of that's from tires on the road, right? So that's the noise and the particulate matter. That doesn't go away with EVs. They're never going to be a great way to move large volumes of people. You're always going to have a lot of congestion. And, I think often we talk about EVs and we're very excited that they could be something that's, a boon to the grid. But, yes, having more distributed storage could be useful, but EVs themselves are also a big new load that you are having to serve, which might change, the whole bulk transmission connected resource mix in a way that makes the whole system more expensive potentially to serve that, rather than having a system where you had more rapid transit, you had more walkable, bikeable communities. So that's my little rant that EVs are not a panacea, that there's still a lot of problems, but yeah, sure, better than ICEs, but not universally a fix.
Not a panacea. I'm glad we got your rant. I have an opposite take that EVs are great. Not a panacea, though. Absolutely agree with that. Conleigh, do you feel valued and appreciated? Do you feel seen and heard, given you got a chance to rant about EVs?
I do. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Good. How about you, Farhad? It is very early in the morning in Australia right now. Was this worth you getting up early to do?
It was. I think I'm going to get another cup of coffee to refill, though.
Good. Ahlmahz, do you feel seen, heard, valued, and appreciated? Are you having a blessed Ramadan?
I am. Thank you very much, Paul. And by the way, Farhad, I thought you were going to say, I'm going to go take another nap now.
Well, thank you all. Special thanks to our presenting sponsor, the Energy Authority, for making this show possible. If you want to feel seen and heard, try tea. To our listeners, while you aren't seen or heard, you are valued and appreciated. Roll on, enthusiasts. Roll on.
We started in hard times to bring us all into the laughter through thick and through thin for public power enthusiasts.
Public Power Underground is a production of News Data and Seattle City Light. You don't have to be subscribed to News Data, this weekly newsletter, to get this podcast, but it sure makes the podcast make a lot more sense. I do record this every week, so you get that little misspeaking and thrown in there for just good fun. The views expressed here are own and not the official views of Seattle City Light, Tacoma Power, S&P Global, News Data, or the organization of the guests also appearing on Public Power Underground. Today's episode was written and produced by Paul Dockery, Ahlmahz Negash, Conleigh Byers, and Farhad Billimoria. And it's edited and published by the stellar team at Pioneer Utility Resources, with sound mixing by Lucas Smith and video editing by Brendan Delzer. Our theme song, Roll On Enthusiasts, was rewritten, performed, and recorded by Aaron Guillory and Ian Bledsoe. You can find Public Power Underground on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Please share with energy enthusiasts like us, and give us a rating and review on your app of choice if you enjoyed the content. We did fall behind Jesse Jenkins and Rob Myers, I forget his name now, but they're not going to listen anyway, a number of 5-star ratings on Apple Podcasts. So if you have a phone, Apple phone, give us a 5-star review so we can get back ahead of Shift Key. And by doing that, it helps other energy enthusiasts like us find us. Public Power Underground for electric utility enthusiasts. Public Power Underground, it's work to watch.